Welcome back. Well, Donald Trump's tariffs are fueling global unrest. Mass protests erupting worldwide, with thousands calling on the president to keep his hands off democracy.
This, as America's largest bank forecasts a 60% chance of a global recession.
Welcome back. The world is shifting, and fast. Donald Trump's aggressive tariff policies have triggered more than just diplomatic squabbles. They've lit a firestorm of unrest across continents. From Berlin to Sao Paulo, the reaction was swift. Tens of thousands poured into the streets, demanding that democracy, not isolationism, guide the future. But as chaos simmered, America's biggest bank sounded the alarm. A 60% chance of a global recession looms on the horizon. Now imagine this. You wake up one morning and your entire livelihood gone. Not because of war, not because of a natural disaster, but because of a single policy announcement. No warning, no sirens, no countdown, just silence. And then, boom, orders stop, machines stall, the lights flicker off. That buzzing factory floor, now an echo chamber of uncertainty. This exact wave of shock washed over the world in early 2025 when the United States abruptly launched sweeping tariffs, some as steep as 35% against key trading partners. Supply chains snapped, whole industries paused, breath held. But while Washington was building walls, Ottawa opened doors, and in that moment, the unlikeliest transformation began. 7 nations, leaders in manufacturing, energy, and technology, didn't wait around. They pivoted straight toward Canada. The shift began in Germany, home to automotive titans in cities like Munich and Wolfsburg. Overnight, a punishing 25% tariff hit all German vehicles and parts entering the United States. We're putting a 25% tariff on all cars not made in America. If it's made here, no tariff. Simple. Trump. In a matter of hours, decades of fine-tuned transatlantic trade unraveled. At Summer GmbH, 2,500 jobs were suddenly on the line. Orders from Detroit canceled. Forklifts motionless. But Germany didn't flinch. On February 14th, it struck a game-changing trade deal with Canada, focusing on hydrogen energy and auto exports, unlocking $10 billion in duty-free quotas per year. German-made transmission casings, once headed for Michigan, were rerouted to Ontario. Within 3 weeks, 70% of January's inventory found new buyers in Canada. In Oshawa, GM Canada restarted dormant lines and rehired 350 workers. Meanwhile, GM plants in Michigan announced painful layoffs. To manage this redirected flood of parts, Hamilton added 200 warehouse jobs. ERP systems were reprogrammed across Germany. Shipments that once went to Detroit were now headed for Toronto. Flint replaced by London. This wasn't just survival, it was rebirth. In Esbjerg, Denmark's coastal wind capital, massive turbine blades, longer than airplanes, sat still. A harsh 30% tariff from the US froze contracts. Production halted. Layoffs loomed. Then Canada stepped in. By April 1st, a $1.5 billion green technology agreement was signed. Turbines meant for Arizona were rerouted to Nova Scotia. Solar arrays headed for Florida detoured to Saskatchewan. That week alone, 150 Danish engineers boarded flights to Halifax and Regina. In Nova Scotia, 200 Canadian workers were trained in turbine tech. Logistic hubs in Saskatchewan ran double shifts. Danish factories adapted fast, reprogramming machines, adjusting quality checks to fit Canadian standards. Wind turbine exports to Canada spiked 65%, saving 900 Danish jobs and creating 1,100 new ones in Canada. This was more than a shift, it was a surge. In South Korea, silence blanketed battery factories. A sudden 20% US tariff shattered ties with California. Lithium-ion modules sat idle. Managers watched losses pile up. But Seoul had a plan. On March 20th, LG Chem and Samsung SDI signed a $1.7 billion partnership with Northvolt Canada. Over 500,000 battery modules were rerouted, now heading for Windsor, London, and Hamilton. 2 Canadian facilities added 350 new tech positions each. In Korea, 3,000 jobs were protected as Ulsan stayed fully operational. The global EV race was no longer centered around the US. It now had a new node, Canada. In Lyon, France, hydrogen electrolyzer production came to a sudden halt. Machines capable of turning water into energy stood silent. A crippling 30% US tariff had wiped out hundreds of millions in contracts, but France reacted swiftly. By April 3rd, it inked a $1.2 billion hydrogen pact with Canada. Quebec and Ontario were set to receive $800 million in French-made electrolyzers. Another $400 million in wind systems was bound for Nova Scotia. French engineers flew to Montreal and Toronto. Canadian energy companies joined factory testing. Meanwhile, 180 Canadian workers enrolled in fast-track energy training programs. The deal saved 1,000 jobs in France and sparked 850 new ones in Canada. Some factories in Lyon still dimmed, but the message was clear. Agility wins. In the red deserts of Pilbara, Australia, iron ore trains suddenly hit a wall. A shocking 30% US tariff paralyzed shipments. By April 20th, Australia had rerouted its course. It signed the Northern Stars Initiative, a $3.5 billion mineral trade deal with Canada. Or headed to California, now moved to Vancouver and Thunder Bay. Canadian steel mills added 400 workers. Output jumped 18% in Ontario. Australia's lithium industry soon followed, sending battery-grade materials to a joint venture with a Canadian electric bus maker in Welland, Ontario. This saved 2,100 Australian mining jobs. Even as smaller contractors absorbed losses, the core survived and adapted. In Ciudad Juarez, Mexico's manufacturing hubs reeled. A brutal 35% tariff on auto parts cut ties with US assembly plants. The fallout threatened a total collapse. Then came a lifeline. Mexico and Canada launched the Triple North Corridor Alliance, an $8.2 billion deal rerouting components, suspensions, ECUs, wiring harnesses northward. Ontario's factories exploded with activity. Windsor ran night shifts. Brampton logistics centers expanded. In Baja California, Mexican packers redirected parts to Canadian buyers, keeping workers paid and lights on. By May, Canada-Mexico bilateral trade surged past $20 billion. The attempt to isolate Mexico had, in fact, bound it closer to Canada. On March 1st, ranchers in Mato Grosso, Brazil faced devastation. A sudden 25% tariff blocked beef, soy, and ethanol from the US, billions in exports gone. But by March 28th, Brazil struck back. A $2 billion trade agreement with Canada rerouted beef to Alberta and Manitoba, soy to Winnipeg and Saskatoon, and ethanol to Quebec. 5,000 Brazilian ranch jobs were saved. Canadian meat processors hired 400. Grain co-ops added 250 roles. Brazilian farms near Londrina expanded, adding new revenue lines. On May 10th, Canadian and Brazilian ministers stood united. This wasn't just recovery, it was redirection on a global scale. From German crankshafts landing in Ontario, to Brazilian cattle offloading in the prairies, to wind turbines arriving in Halifax and EV batteries buzzing through Toronto. This wasn't a temporary fix. This was a global migration of trust. America believed tariffs would bring manufacturing home. Instead, it exported something else, reliability, and Canada was ready to receive it. While Washington closed doors, Ottawa built bridges. While US plants dimmed, Canadian factories lit up. While American suppliers stumbled, Canadian businesses soared. This isn't just about money, it's about identity, it's about resilience, and about the nations that rise when the world changes overnight.